Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable, or narcissistic. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through the system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their jobs easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this, not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. One of the phrases I heard over and over throughout my own court journey was this: you need to cooperate. It sounds simple enough. Of course, I wanted to cooperate. I wasn't trying to create conflict. I wasn't trying to make anyone's job harder. I simply wanted my child to be safe. But here's what nobody ever explained. What exactly does cooperation look like when you're dealing with someone who creates conflict? What does cooperation look like when you're constantly being baited? What does cooperation look like when your instincts are telling you something isn't right? Because those questions matter. And honestly, I think this is where many protective parents become trapped. I know I did. Early in my own journey, I thought cooperation meant saying yes, being agreeable, being flexible, giving the benefit of the doubt, keeping the score, and keeping the peace. I thought if I was accommodating enough, eventually the system would notice. Eventually, someone would recognize that I was trying. Eventually, everything would settle down. Instead, something different happened. The more I accommodated without documenting, the more invisible my experience became. From the outside, it looked like everything was working. Why? Because there was no record showing otherwise. That was one of the biggest lessons I ever learned. Silence creates the appearance of stability, even when life feels anything but stable. That's why I tell parents something that surprises them. Cooperation and documentation are not opposites. They actually belong together. One happens in your behavior, the other happens in your records. Think about it this way. Imagine your child's school proposes something you're unsure about. You can attend the meeting respectfully, you can participate, you can ask thoughtful questions, you can remain calm. That's cooperation. Then you go home, you document what was discussed, you document what was decided. You document how your child responded over the next several weeks. That's documentation. The two things support each other. One does not cancel out the other. One of the biggest mistakes I made early on was believing I had to correct every misunderstanding immediately. If someone said something inaccurate, I wanted to explain. If someone misrepresented an event, I wanted to respond. If something unfair happened, I wanted to fix it right then. Looking back, I understand why. When you're living inside chronic stress, every moment feels urgent. But over time, I realized something. Not every misunderstanding requires an immediate response. Sometimes it requires a careful record. That's a completely different mindset. I've learned that some of the strongest documentation I've ever created came after I said almost nothing in the moment. I simply observed, I participated, I remained respectful. Then I documented exactly what happened. No accusations, no emotional language, just facts. Ironically, those calm records often carried far more weight than any argument I could have made. One thing I tell the parents I work with is this: you don't have to win every interaction. You need to build a credible pattern. Those are different goals. If your goal is winning every interaction, you exhaust yourself. If your goal is building a reliable record, your decisions become much clearer. You'll start asking yourself, is this something I need to respond to? Or is this something I simply need to document? That one question has saved me countless hours of emotional energy. So let's talk about boundaries for a moment, because another misunderstanding is that cooperative parents never say no. That's simply not true. Healthy cooperation includes healthy boundaries. You can say, that doesn't work for our schedule. You can say, I'll follow the court order. You can say, I'll think about that and respond tomorrow. You can say, I disagree, but I'll comply. Those are all cooperative responses. Notice what they are not. They are not emotional. They are not sarcastic. They are not defensive. They are simply clear. One lesson I wish someone had taught me years ago is this: being easy is not the same thing as being cooperative. Some parents become so afraid of appearing difficult that they stop advocating altogether. They stop asking questions, they stop documenting concerns, they stop speaking up, and eventually, they disappear inside the process. Please don't do that. You can be respectful without becoming invisible. You can be cooperative without abandoning yourself. You can participate fully while still protecting your child. In fact, I would argue that's exactly what healthy cooperation looks like. Another thing I've noticed over the years is that cooperative parents tend to recover faster emotionally. Why? Because they're not spending every day preparing for battle. They're choosing their moments carefully. That doesn't mean they ignore problems. It means they become incredibly intentional. One phrase I often repeat to myself is, not every problem deserves today's energy. Some problems deserve today's documentation. There is a difference. And honestly, that shift changed my life. It allowed me to become a calmer parent. It allowed me to conserve emotional energy for my son instead of spending it trying to control adults I couldn't control. Because here's the truth: you cannot control another parent's behavior. You cannot control a judge. You cannot control a guardian ad litem. You cannot control a school administrator, but you can control how you show up. You can control your tone, you can control your boundaries, and you can absolutely control your documentation. That's real power. Before we finish, I want to leave you with something I wish someone had told me years ago. Cooperation is not surrender. It's strategy. It's choosing to remain steady when someone else wants chaos. It's choosing credibility over reactivity. It's choosing documentation over argument. It's choosing your child over your ego. That's not a weakness, that's wisdom. And courts noticed that far more than many parents realize. So, this week, I want you to ask yourself one question the next time conflict appears. Do I need to respond? Or do I simply need to document? Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Just calm, clear record that quietly tells the story over time. Because documentation isn't about winning today's argument. It's about building tomorrow's credibility. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to be perfect. And you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.